In chapter 1, we learn from the narrator of this story that during the time of the judges, since there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They are cursed because of their disobedience. Their sins brought calamity to their land. There was famine in Bethlehem. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons moved to Moab, seeking for approval. Then Elimelech dies, and later both sons, Mahlon and Chilion, who had married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, also die. Naomi is left alone in a foreign land with her daughters-in-law. After hearing that the famine in Judah has ended, Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. She urges her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab and remarry. Orpah agrees and returns to the land of Moab and to her god Chemosh. Ruth refuses to leave Naomi, declaring her unwavering loyal with a famous self-maledictory oath. Sabi niya po, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. After that sin, Naomi said no more. Chapter 1 ends with Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem at the start of the barley harvest. Naomi is still grieving her losses and asked to be called Mara, meaning bitter, because she feels the Lord Almighty has dealt bitterly with her. Now in chapter 2 is the beginning of the blessings. Mara, ayaw niyang pagpatawag ng Naomi, and Ruth are in their toughest situation. Kailangan nila bumangon sa kanilang pagkakadapa. They are both widows, and being a widow in ancient time was really hard. It was the most disadvantaged classes. They don't have a protector and a provider. Even though God doesn't speak directly in this book, His sovereign control is seen in how He orchestrates through His providence, protects His people, and provides for their needs. So the title of our sermon this afternoon, the faithful King's providential care for His people. The situation of Naomi and Ruth was hard, and even though Naomi knew that God ended the famine, she can see the blessing and hope that God has given to them. We can relate to Naomi when our situation is hard, we can't see God's blessing and hope in tough time. We have this one question or compliment, why we should trust God in any situation. Why we should trust God in any situations. And we will answer it. And we have these 3 points. First, because God cares through His providence. God shows His care for His people through His providence that is always at work. So mag-focus po tayo sa verse 1 to 7 para dito. Pangalawa po, why we should trust God in any situation? Because God shows His care for His people through His protection. Focus po tayo sa verses 8 to 13 para po sa second point natin. And for our third point, why we should trust God in any situation? Because God shows His care for His people through His provision. Our main point, or the big idea, the faithful King, through His sovereign rule, orders all things by providence, secures His people by protection, and sustains them by His provision. Kids, listen carefully, and parents, teach them these 3 words. Una po, providence. Pangalawa, protection. Pangatlo, provision. To summarize it, for our covenant kids, the good King loves you, keeps you safe, and gives you what you need. Let's go to our first point. God cares through His providence. The narrator starts chapter 2 by introducing a new character in the story in verse 1. He is a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Boaz is contrast to Elimelech. In chapter 1, we know that Elimelech decided to flee and take his family to Moab instead of staying in Bethlehem. We know that Elimelech didn't trust his God and king in their situation, and it was a sinful decision because he did what was like others did in Judges period. He did what was right in his own eyes since there was no king in Israel. And we know the curse. Elimelech died, but now we see a man who stayed in Bethlehem, a worthy man, a faithful man to God, and the Lord preserved him. In verse 2, Ruth, the Moabite, asked Naomi that she will go to glean. And Ruth said, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And sabi po ni Naomi, "Go, my daughter." And sa mga di po nakakalam, ano po ba yung gleaning? Punta po tayo sa Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 19. Sabi po dito ng Panginoon, "When you reap your harvest in your field, and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands." God commanded the landowners not to harvest every corner of their fields or to collect all the fallen produce. So yung mga nalalaglag po, pinapakuha na po yun sa mga sojourners, sa mga widows, sa fatherless. And this was more than a kindness. It was a built-in system of care for the needy. And in verse 3, Ruth went out to find a field to glean. She happened to come to the part of Boaz's field. And in verse 4, behold, Boaz came with kindness in his voice. Boaz greeted them, "The Lord be with you," and the workers, glad to see him. They replied, "The Lord bless you." We can see the heart of Boaz. He acknowledged the Lord's presence with the workers in the field. You can also sense that his workers love and respect him. And in verse 5 and 6, Boaz asked curiously to a young man who's in charge with the reaper, "Sino nga ba tong woman na ito? Whose young woman is this?" And the servant answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." We can sense that Naomi and Ruth's story are well known in Bethlehem. Maliit na town lang po kasi yung Bethlehem. Kaya po, mabilis po kumalat yung story. In verse 7, Ruth asked permission to glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers in Boaz's field. After giving her a permission, since morning, she continuously worked tirelessly and got only a short rest. In Ruth's mind, all she wanted was to find a food to glean so that she and her mother-in-law can eat and survive. She was not searching for a romance or expecting a protector and a provider. Her desire was bread, not love. May kasabihan po tayo, di ba? Tiyan muna bago pag-ibig. But it happened that she came to Boaz's field. The narrator does not give us a glimpse or explain how Ruth came to that field. This was not a simple case of luck, chance, or fate. All of these are not simply a coincidence. It was the faithful king who sovereignly worked his divine providence. He was arranging every detail, moving Ruth from Moab to Bethlehem so that at the appointed time, she would encounter Boaz. This was no accident, but the sovereign orchestration of the Lord who governs all things according to his wise and perfect plan. Though Ruth's path was blurry by grief and loss, and though she could not see God's hand clearly, she trusted him. She knew the God of Israel, the covenant-keeping Lord, who remains faithful even when his ways are hidden. Ruth's faithfulness was evident to all. Alam po nung mga tao sa Bethlehem na siya ay a worthy woman. And Boaz himself affirmed it. May kita po natin yan sa Ruth chapter 3, verse 11. And while Naomi's heart was bitter, believed that God was against her, yet behind the veil of sorrow, the Lord was indeed accomplishing his good purposes. What seems like emptiness was, in truth, the unfolding of his providence. We can relate to this. We cannot see the future, nor even yung next 5 minutes. And we wrestle with this question, Lord, why is this happening? Where are you? Di ko na alam yung nangyayari sa akin. Saan ba papunta yung career ko? Yet the scripture assures that though his providence may be mysterious, his faithfulness is certain. He's working all things together for the good of those who love him. This truth comforts the church, comforts us, that God cares for his people, not by accident, but through his wise and sovereign providence. So church, trust him in mystery. Even we can't see the full picture, remember he is ever faithful to his covenant people. Rest in him, rest in his providence, and let the sovereign waves of his care carry your boat where he wills. And providence means that God preserves and sustains his creation, governing all events for his glory and our good. And through his providence, he also shows his care through his protection, preserving his people as they walk by faith in a world of uncertainty. Now let's move to our second point, where God shows his care for his people through his protection. Let's read verse 8 to 13. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughters. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." When she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "What have I found favor in your eyes?" that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and the full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." We can see in verses 8 to 9 that Boaz spoke gently to Ruth, urging her not to go into other fields to glean, but to remain in his field, close to the young woman who followed the reapers. In this way, she would be cared for and provided what she needed. He also commanded the young men working in his field not to lay hands on her, ensuring her safety. Moreover, Boaz invited Ruth to drink freely from the vessels whenever she is thirsty, showing his generous concern for her. Clearly, you can see that Boaz was protecting Ruth. It was God's providential protection at work, in action. Through Boaz, the Lord was preserving Ruth, guarding her for the unfolding of his sovereign and wise plan. Ruth's need for protection was not incidental. It was essential for the fulfillment of God's redemptive purposes, which he was orchestrating with perfect wisdom. Ruth was recognized as an excellent woman, or woman of excellence. She is faithful, and for sure, she was willing to listen to Boaz and follow his guidance. In verse 10, Ruth, overwhelmed by Boaz's kindness, she asked, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Her question reflects the posture of one unworthy, yet chosen to receive mercy. She marveled that Boaz would show such grace to her, a widow without protection, and a foreigner without standing. Kanina po nasabi natin na yung widow was the most disadvantaged classes during their time. And she was now living in a foreign land. She was living to a land without her relatives, without the circle of friends. Don't know very well of the place, even the tradition, how they work. But Boaz's kindness towards Ruth mirrored the gracious initiative of God towards his people. Boaz answered in verses 11 to 12, sabi niya po dito, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and the full reward be given by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have came to take refuge." Bethlehem was a small rural town in Judah. Ruth's devotion to Naomi became widely known. Her steadfast loyalty was not hidden. It was reported to Boaz, and recognized by the people of the town. Ruth's faithfulness was her testimony, shining as evidence of His grace at work in her life. Boaz declared a blessing over Ruth, saying that the Lord Himself, the God of Israel, would repay her for all she had done, granting her a full reward. Boaz said to Ruth that she was under refuge, under the wings of the covenant-keeping God who shelters and preserves His people. Ito po ay isang imagery ng isang baby bird snuggling under the wings of her mother. It gave us a picture of trust and security. In this, Boaz recognized that Ruth's faith and devotion were not merely human loyalty, but evidence of God's preserving grace at work in her life. In verse 13, Ruth replied in a very humble way or polite way. Sabi niya, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not your servant. Ruth just humbly acknowledged Boaz's kindness. He allowed her to glean in his field and not to go to other field. He gave her protection by instructing his young men not to touch her. He gave her water to drink. This kindness brought comfort to her, not merely because Boaz, but because she recognized the covenant-keeping God as her true protector. Boaz's gentle words spoken to her, though she was not his servant, reflected the Lord's tender care for the outsider. In this, Ruth experienced both human kindness and divine refuge. So church, are you worrying for your safety every day? Just as Ruth found refuge under His wings, so do we. We should trust our God who gives us protection, comfort, and preservation to His people in our daily trials. He knows us. He knows His sheep by name and guard them with a shepherd's hand. Here in the Philippines, we face many challenges, natural disasters, family burdens, and responsibility of guarding our children. At madami pa pong iba. We often worry about typhoons, earthquakes, flood, volcanic eruptions. Yet even these calamities are under the sovereign hand of God. He rules over creation, and we must trust Him, for He knows how to protect His people. Family burdens also weigh heavily. At times, we are called to support our relative financially, emotionally, and spiritually, kung ano pa po yan. At other times, we cannot help as we would like. Still, we trust the Lord, for He knows how to care for them in ways beyond our strength. We too, parents, carry the concern of guarding our children from the evil of this world. We plan, we train our children, but ultimately, it is God alone who can protect them. Our trust must rest in Him. So, church, let us place our confidence in His providential care, for He is wise in all things, and His protection is perfect. So again, providence means that God sustains His creation, directing all events for His glory and for the good of His people. Through His providence, He is not only governs, but also provides by showing His care through sustaining and supplying what His people need. Now, let's turn to our third point. God cares through His provision. Again, let's read verses 14 to 23. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and she passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, Let her glean, let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not reproach her, and also pull out some from the bundles of her, and leave it for her to glean. And do not rebuke her. So she gleaned the field until the evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw that she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, Where did you glean today, and where you have worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law, with whom she had worked, and said, The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, May he bless by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, The man is close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And Ruth, the Moabite, he said to me, You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that you go out with this young woman, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young woman of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Now Boaz went above and beyond the call of duty required by the law in order to allow the widow, the poor, the aliens to glean in his field, or foreigner. Boaz showed great kindness and favor to Ruth at mealtime. It would be enough to have just invited her, but he also invited her to share a full meal, to eat with bread and wine. He even gave the privilege of dipping. She ate until she was satisfied, but Ruth kept some back for Naomi. She was sensible to take out for Naomi. Mahal niya yung mother-in-law niya. Boaz, in his kindness, instructed his men to intentionally pull out some of the barley stalks from the bundle of sheaves so that Ruth can glean and gather them also. And this action of Boaz was beautiful. For Boaz, his desire was to bless Ruth without stripping her of dignity or making her appear as mere recipients of charity. Instead, he allowed grain to fall by accident. Kumbaga nagkunwari lang po si Boaz, giving Ruth the opportunity to glean it herself. In this way, Boaz showed generosity with respect. And through it, by giving her meal, sheaves, and sheep to glean, God's providential care was displayed. At the end of the day, Ruth gleaned and threshed so much grain that it equal to ephah of barley. Sa konteksto po natin, nasa 5.5 gallon po ito or 22 liters yung bigat niya o yung dami. Sabi po sa ESV commentary, it will supply them at least 2 weeks for the 2 women. Clearly, God's hands of blessing was upon Ruth. Yes, she received generosity from others, but at the same time, she labored diligently. From morning to evening, Ruth worked faithfully in the field. Her hard work was not in vain, for it was under the providence of God that her effort bore fruit. And in verse 18, Ruth returned home to Naomi and presented her with the leftover roasted grain, along with all she had gleaned that day. The blessing of God upon Ruth now overflowed to Naomi. And Naomi, surprised by the abundance, Naomi asked, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." When Ruth revealed that she had gleaned in Boaz's field, Naomi immediately recognized him as a kinsman redeemer. For the first time since the loss of her husband and sons, Naomi acknowledged the covenant faithfulness of God. And it was manifested in His gracious provision of a Redeemer. She declared, "May he blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." This moment marked a dramatic shift. Naomi, who once called herself Mara because the Almighty had dealt bitterly with her, now began to see God's plan unfolding. Her declaration of blessings revealed a new sense of fullness in contrast to the emptiness. She experienced po sa first chapter of the story, dahil namatay po yung anak niya and yung husband niya. It was the turning point where the despair gave way to hope. And bitterness was replaced by the joy of God's providence. Naomi's story reminds us that even in season of emptiness, bitterness, and despair, God is quietly at work unfolding His sovereign plan. Just as Naomi moved from lament to blessing when she recognized God's covenant faithfulness through Boaz, we too are called to trust that the Lord is weaving His purposes, even when we cannot see them clearly. Many of us today feel the weight of war in the world, corruption in society, daily food, hospital bills, and the heavy burden of high prices. These realities can make life feel hopeless, like there is no way forward. Yet Naomi's story reminds us that God's providence is never absent. Even in the darkest seasons, He is quietly unfolding His plans. God's providence through provision assures us that He will not abandon us. What feels like emptiness today may be the very soil where we grow to fullness tomorrow. All of this forwards to Christ, who fulfills this role perfectly in the gospel. Boaz is a type of Christ, the Redeemer who embodies covenant faithfulness, ensuring that the outsiders are brought in, the weak are protected, and the hungry are fed. Boaz's favor to Ruth is a prefigures of Christ's grace to sinners. He welcomes the outsider, protects the vulnerable, and provides abundantly. The meal anticipates the eschatological banquet and the Lord's Supper, where Christ serves his people and satisfies their deepest need. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer, and this role is an Israelite law was to restore land, lineage, and life to the destitute, a role that finds its ultimate fulfillment in Christ, the Redeemer of his people. So Cruciform, let us rest in the faithful King, the one who rules all by providence, shields his people with protection, and sustains us through his provision. Let's pray.